of you, okay? You work for Trump. Do you know if Donald Trump ever practiced his speech? No end date for the Trump tax cuts, which are a tax break for everyone. People don't understand. A surprise change of events. Kayleigh McEnany, who used to be the press secretary for the White House, abruptly quit Fox News, leaving viewers holding their breath and stunned. Everyone will agree that was one of the most shocking things to ever happen on TV. McEnany sent a shocking message that people will remember for years to come in an angry speech that kept people on the edge of their seats. Let's look at what McEnany has to say, which had a big impact on the people who heard it. One interesting thing about McEnany is that she isn't afraid to speak out. Everyone was shocked by how she talked about Harris-Kamala's current problems, but we still don't know what she said about her. Prepare to be thrilled by the latest news about Kamala that has reached a lot of people. Harris-Kamala is harshly criticized by Kayleigh McEnany. In an interview, Kayleigh McEnany spoke negatively about Kamala Harris's economic plans, focusing on how they might hurt middle-class Americans. McEnany said that Harris's suggested tax plans and economic strategies would undo the tax cuts that were made by the Trump administration, which would make things harder for regular people. She made it clear that even though Harris says she wants to help middle and low-income families, her policies are likely to lead to higher taxes, fewer jobs, and an unstable economy. People who made between $5,000 and $50,000 had their taxes cut by 16%, and people who made between $50,000 and $100,000 had their taxes cut by 17.7%. McEnany said that these cuts helped working-class families' finances by letting them keep more of their wages. Harris's plans, on the other hand, would raise taxes, taking away the relief they were getting before. Moving on from the economy to Harris' pick of running mate, McEnany also said bad things about it. She said Harris made a big mistake when she didn't choose Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, as her vice presidential choice. McEnany said Shapiro was a good candidate who did well with a wide range of voters and was key to winning important states like Pennsylvania. But Harris chose Tim Walz instead, which McEnany said was because Harris wanted a vice president who would be subservient. Polls show that Walz has a lot of support, but McEnany was confused about this move and didn't think it would help Harris win swing states. She said a few things about Kamala Harris's business plan that she thought were bad for the U.S. Economy. The idea that Harris made to raise the business tax rate to 28% was a key point that McEnany brought up. She compared this to when the Trump administration lowered the corporate tax rate to 21%. McEnany said that this made the U.S. more competitive on the world stage and encouraged businesses to invest in operations, create jobs, and raise wages. It was said by McEnany that this approach worked because wages rose faster than inflation during the Trump administration. McEnany was concerned that Harris's plan to raise the business tax rate could undo progress by lowering investments, laying off workers, keeping wages the same, and reducing new ideas. Additionally, she said that Harris's proposed tax plan would make the U.S.'s company tax rate higher compared to countries like China and Ireland. This could make it less appealing for businesses to operate in the U.S. In addition to wanting corporate taxes to go up, McEnany was also against Harris's plan to tax unrealized gains under this plan. People and companies would be taxed on the estimated value of assets like stocks and real estate that they have not yet sold. McEnany talked about how this strategy could hurt small business owners and entrepreneurs. She suggested that a business owner with a lot of assets but no quick cash flow might have to sell their company to pay their taxes based on how much it is expected to be worth. McEnany said that this policy was extreme and lefty, and he warned that it might stop people from being creative and starting new businesses. She also looked at Harris's campaign plan from a political point of view. She said Harris was behind in Pennsylvania, where her numbers are 4.3% lower than Joe Biden's from 4 years ago and 6 points lower than Hillary Clinton's in 2016. Pennsylvania is a key swing state. McEnany said that in the upcoming discussion, it is important for Harris to set her own unique vision by breaking away from Biden's policies. She told Harris that instead of trying to carry on a tradition, she should focus on minimizing her losses and making her campaign stand out. As McEnany thought about how to win debates in the past, she kept going with this idea. She remembered how Trump's less formal and more casual planning helped him win the second 2020 debate. She told Trump to put women's issues first and said that other people had come up with plans to lower the cost of child care and make schools safer, which Harris could talk about in the debate. Not only is McEnany's lack of fear interesting, but it's also interesting to see that she wasn't alone. Other speakers supported her. Also, let's hear what they have to say. Mark Levin hits Harris of Kamala very hard. Mark Levin has been very critical of Kamala Harris, and he has continued to do so. He questions her qualifications and health for the vice presidential job. In his comments, he often says that Harris's rise to fame was mostly due to politics, especially identity politics, and not because of her own skills. Levin says that the media is wrong to only talk about Harris's wins and not her failures, which makes her look like she doesn't have the right skills and credentials for the job. He says that Harris is often shielded from criticism, which suggests that her race and gender are often used as defenses to avoid an honest look. According to Levin, Harris hasn't done anything important as vice president. She says that her time has been marked by confusing statements and a lack of real successes. He talks about how Harris has gotten flack for focusing on certain issues, at the expense of other important problems like ending a pregnancy. Levin keeps criticizing how she handled the border situation and making fun of the idea that she could be a good border czar. Levin also says that the Democratic Party is helping Harris get elected by putting down opponents and stopping people from having open conversations, specifically about her possible promotion to a higher post. He says Harris is being crowned instead of being chosen because the party is running the process so she doesn't have to deal with any competition. Levin makes the ironic point that Harris hasn't shown any desire to deal with primary challenges from people in her own party, even though she has said she is ready to face Donald Trump. Levin thinks that Harris's appointment as vice president is mostly due to identity politics and media message, not real leadership or skill. He believes that her promotion is a sign of bigger problems in the political world today, where important conversations are shut down and skill is put second to political maneuvering. Mark Levin's main complaint about Kamala Harris is that he says she can't handle the big jobs she's been given, especially when it comes to law enforcement and the problem at the southern border. Levin doesn't believe Harris is qualified to be a tough prosecutor because, despite her well-deserved reputation, there isn't much proof that she actually handled any high-profile cases while she was San Francisco District Attorney or California Attorney General. He doesn't believe the media's portrayal of her as a skilled lawyer because they don't have enough proof. Levin also doesn't like how Harris handles big national and international issues, such as how she handles anti-Semitism and her views on Israel. He says she isn't tough enough on people who put Jews in danger and that she isn't clear about her support for Israel. Levin stresses that her decision not to attend Benjamin Netanyahu's speech is a sign that the U.S. quote, is weak, ties with Israel and makes its enemies stronger. Levin says that Harris didn't do much about the border issue even though he was in charge, which led to little progress. He says this is just one example of how bad her leadership has been in general, and that many big problems are still not solved during her time in office. He also doesn't like Harris's communication skills and says that she often lacks clarity, confidence, and readiness when she's in public. He believes this hurts her reputation and makes the U.S. look less strong around the world. Finally, Levin talks about what he sees as problems with Harris's history in law enforcement and crime. Basically, he says that she used to be very tough on crime, but now backs progressive changes to the criminal justice system, which shows that the change was made for political reasons rather than moral ones. Levin thinks that Harris's lack of stability makes it hard to trust her to be a good leader. These speakers have shown us a lot of things we didn't know. Don't forget to check back to find out everything about this continuing story. The shocking truth about Laura Ingraham. Rather than criticizing or being rude, Laura Ingraham thinks that Kamala Harris insults the brains of the American people through the way she acts and talks. Ingraham thinks that Harris avoids deep talks about important issues a lot of the time, instead relying on scripted platitudes and media appearances that aren't very deep and don't address the real concerns of the American people. Ingraham recently wrote about a conversation she had with Harris that she thought was too easy, because Harris didn't ask any tough questions and there wasn't any real challenge. As a joke, Ingraham points out that Harris wasn't asked about her love of long walks on the beach, which makes it sound like the interview was more like a chat than an official interview with a presidential candidate. According to Ingraham, the way the media treats Harris differently isn't just a personal preference. It's part of a bigger pattern where she doesn't have to deal with criticism or tough questions like other politicians do. Keeping with this theme, Ingraham talks about a private chat Harris had with Oprah Winfrey and says it was like giving her a verbal foot massage. For Ingraham, this shows that Harris has been safe in her job and has never had to deal with the harsh realities of politics like Donald Trump and other politicians have had to. To show the difference between Harris and Trump, Ingraham says that Trump's direct and often harsh comments on political opponents are a well-known part of his public image and are seen as a sign of honesty and openness. Ingraham thinks that Harris counts on well-thought-out talking points and friendly reporters who don't question her on important issues. She makes it clear that Harris has always gotten this special treat. Ingraham says that Harris has gotten what he calls special treatment while she has been in politics. This is true for both her rise to leadership positions and her acts in this election. While other presidential candidates have had to work hard to win over people in early primary states like Iowa and New Hampshire, Harris hasn't had to do that. She hasn't had to go out in the cold or hold town hall meetings to convince voters who aren't sure about her ideas. The fact that she is running for president doesn't mean she has to deal with the negative news like Donald Trump does all the time. Harris does, however, avoid direct and difficult questions about how she feels about important issues such as China, Russia, the economy, and border security. Ingram also says that Harris often uses empty words and old phrases when she goes on public speaking engagements, not adding much to political talks. She made fun of Harris for always talking about how much she loved her country and how important it was for Americans to be proud to be American. Ingram doesn't believe Harris's comments are real, especially since Harris and other leftists have said that the U.S. is racist by design. Ingram thinks that Harris's past statements do not match up with how she talks about nationalism now, which she thinks isn't real and is just meant to please people. It's not just Harris that Ingram criticizes, she also thinks that the media and political elites are using the same stunt. She says that lawmakers and the media who say they support democracy are hurting it by keeping Harris from being properly examined and criticized. Ingram seems to be saying that this way of doing things is not only dishonest, but also very offensive to the people of the United States, who should have a political process that is open, honest, and responsible. Ingram warns that Harris's plan could set a dangerous bar for future political races if it works. In the same way, people who want to run for office may use endorsements from famous people, vague comments, and casual interviews to draw attention away from the real issues. As Ingram sees it, this isn't just the fault of one politician, but a problem with the idea of democracy itself. People who vote can't make decisions based on facts and policy anymore because all they see is showmanship and shallowness. Ingram shows that the real attacks are coming from Kamala Harris, not Donald Trump, who is known for being direct and sometimes mean. Ingram thinks Harris insults the intelligence of the American people every time she does a scripted interview and repeats old catchphrases without offering real answers. Ingram says Harris's campaign is based on empty promises, celebrity appeal, and not caring about important problems facing the country. Ingram says this is the worst crime and Americans should not put up with it. No one wants to say nice things about Kamala. Laura Ingram is still attacking Kamala Harris by pointing out the difference between what she says in public and the problems that Americans really face. Ingram says that Harris's talks are more about how she presents herself than what she says, since she avoids tough questions by giving vague, practiced answers. When Harris was asked how she planned to deal with the important problem of high living costs, her answer was general and didn't give any details. Instead of giving a clear plan, Harris talked about the vague idea of the American dream. He didn't talk about the real causes of inflation or how the government's actions may have contributed to it. Ingram makes fun of Harris for saying that inflation is caused by things outside of the country, saying that it is actually caused by spending bills from Harris and President Biden. Ingram thinks Harris's inability or unwillingness to give a direct answer is rude and cocky, and she says she thinks Americans will back her even though she doesn't have any specific policy solutions. Ingram believes this is a bigger problem with the way Harris runs her government and campaigns. She avoids talking about real problems but still wants help. She also doesn't like Harris' performance in the interview. She says her answers are like those of a college student who isn't ready for class. According to Ingram, when Harris is asked about complicated issues like inflation or border security, he chooses to reword the question rather than giving a smart or knowledgeable answer. One of the most memorable things for Ingram was how Harris didn't have a clear answer for border security. It sounds like Ingram thinks Harris's answers are boring and don't offer any real solutions to the problem at the southern border of the United States. Ingram sees this as a sign of Harris's general tendency to avoid taking responsibility and not deal with problems head-on. Ingram also doesn't like how Harris tries to change her image in public talks, like the one she did with Oprah Winfrey. Ingram says Harris's appearance on Oprah was an attempt to change her public image from a progressive, anti-Second Amendment figure to someone more relatable and easy to connect with. It's silly for Ingram to compare this change to Harris trying to act like a modern Annie Oakley, a skilled Wild West figure. Ingram thinks that Harris's rebranding is another example of her putting appearance over content and trying to change her public image without facing real criticism of her choices. Laura Ingram is very critical of Kamala Harris's way of talking to the public. She thinks it's a deliberate attempt to avoid responsibility and having real talks about important issues. Ingram says that Harris changes her image by practicing positive conversations and giving weak, inspiring speeches. She does this while ignoring important issues that matter to the American people, like crime, money problems, and abortion. Ingram says that the vice president's words are thin and vague, pointing out that phrases like freedom to be sound fake and condescending, especially when considering Harris's views on abortion. Ingram links Harris's words to real worries that regular Americans have, like not having enough money or being afraid for their safety. Her claim is that Harris's focus on issues like ending pregnancies is an attempt to distract from the fact that she hasn't done many useful things while in office. Ingram says Harris's plan to avoid tough questions about policies that affect the economy and national security seems to be an attempt to trick the people. She doesn't like relying on controlled environments where Harris is only asked pre-approved questions. This way of doing things keeps voters' problems from being really looked at and talked about, she says. Ingram says that this avoidance of duty is part of a larger effort by powerful people to weaken Trump. He names Alex Soros and Mark Cuban as examples, whom she says are supporting efforts to get rid of Trump. She says that powerful people around the world like weakest leaders like Biden who put the needs of other countries ahead of their own. Ingram says that this situation shows a big difference between how ready Trump is to face problems and how she thinks Harris and Biden are to avoid being leaders. Instead of making empty claims, Ingram's analysis says American leaders should face tough questions and deal with real problems like crime, unstable economies, and poorly controlled borders. It looks like everyone is against Kamala. Let's look into what the important Fox News host Faulkner has to say in more detail. Kamala is the subject of an anchor session with Harris Faulkner. A well-known Fox News host named Harris Faulkner has pointed out a major problem with Kamala Harris's interviews and public comments while the media attention is still going on. One of the main points Faulkner makes is that the vice president isn't ready to answer important and obvious questions, like those about the security problems with former President Donald Trump. Faulkner criticizes Harris for not being able to see that questions about Trump's safety would come up, especially after multiple attempts to kill him, which makes it sound like even a child could understand how important this problem is. Faulkner's comments show how annoyed she is with Harris's hesitancy or inability to give clear, concise answers, especially when talking about important issues. Karine Jean-Pierre calling Trump a threat to democracy is seen by Faulkner as adding to the problem. Faulkner says that constantly portraying Trump as a threat not only oversimplifies politics but also makes security risks worse by making people dislike and be hostile toward him. Faulkner thinks that the fact that the current government doesn't see the threat Trump is facing and doesn't do anything to protect him is a bad thing about them. She doesn't believe that the Secret Service and other government agencies can properly protect the former president, especially since their own investigations seem unclear or not thorough enough. Faulkner is angry and doubtful about the security services that are supposed to protect Trump. He questions their honesty and their ability to do thorough investigations into themselves. In addition, Faulkner shows how Harris and the administration are treating these important problems in different ways. She says that the government should put Trump's safety first if they really think he is a threat. They should not use him for political gain. Faulkner thinks that making Trump look like a threat could show that he is politically innocent or worse, that he is involved in putting his life in danger. Faulkner says that the government can't put Trump's safety first because they are so focused on making him look like a threat to democracy. She says that Trump's dangerous political move of posturing could have bad results for both him and the country, getting people to lose faith in the organizations that are supposed to protect politicians. Harris Faulkner's recent comments on race, how the media portrays people of color, and the current political climate have gotten a lot of attention for how openly she talks about these issues and how ready she is to deal with tough issues head-on. Faulkner, an African-American reporter, has talked freely about how important it is for journalists to be diverse and how representation can change the way stories are told. Right now, when race, equality, and the media's impact on public discourse are at the forefront of national talks, her point of view is even more important. In one of her reviews, Faulkner says that the media and politicians are trying to tell the public a story that doesn't represent the real lives of regular Americans. She talks about the difference between what the Biden government says about the economy and what the facts are, and the truth that people are facing. Faulkner thinks that this difference is the reason why many Americans don't believe the government's story. He says that powerful people like Barack and Michelle Obama can't change this fact by convincing people. Faulkner doesn't like how Kamala Harris always says the same things about issues like immigration and the economy. She feels that Harris is shallow. The media's soft method to interviewing her shows how the political media system works as a whole. She doesn't agree with the media that Harris is often spared tough questions, which leaves people confused about important issues. According to Faulkner, the media's love for Harris and other well-known Democrats hurts the people, who are looking for real leadership and real solutions to big issues. Her research looks at new developments in political safety, especially when it comes to former President Donald Trump. She talks about Meredith Bank, the head agent in charge of security at a gathering where there was a breach, as someone who might not be trustworthy. Faulkner suggests that security problems might have something to do with putting more emphasis on diversity and fairness efforts rather than qualifications. People are worried that this set of questions is making important organizations like the Secret Service less effective because of the need to be politically polite. Faulkner also points out a difference in how the media presents politicians, especially in the interviews of Vice President Kamala Harris, and conservative Senator J.D. Vance, which are very different from one another. She talks about the difference between Harris's interviews, which are calm and friendly, and the ones she did with Vance, which were rough and annoying. The way the media treats certain leaders, she says, shows that they are biased by nature. Faulkner's criticisms show that she worries about the honesty of the media, the duty of the government, and how important it is to keep public conversations open and fair. As a well-known journalist, she keeps looking into these issues in a way that makes people question both lawmakers and the news outlets that cover them. Now, let's look at what the media needs to do about what's been going on lately. Perfect role of the media. Faulkner's focus on diversity and inclusion in the media shows how committed she is to writing about the problems and successes African Americans face. The goal of her most recent interview on Fox News was to start more conversations about diversity in journalism by focusing on these issues. She wasn't happy with how the media did at the NABJ meeting, pointing out that some events had turned into political stump speeches instead of being journalistic. Faulkner pointed out that the NABJ had planned for the event to be about journalism, but it changed into a political rally instead, going against what it was meant to do. People are worried about how honest the news is and how much they put political goals ahead of real research because of this change. She also says bad things about the experts that the Biden administration asks for help with big problems like the economy and national security. Faulkner didn't think the advisors were very good, and he thought that their regular mistakes might be making the government even worse. She said she was worried about how accountable and clear it was that the government was choosing its advisors, and she suggested that the important voices in policy discussions be looked at again. Faulkner, along with friends like Greg Gutfeld and Kayleigh McEnany, writes about bigger social issues by looking into things like free speech, cancel culture, and political correctness. Gutfeld's friendly, casual style tries to make difficult topics easy to understand, while McEnany's precise style gives political analysis a level of accuracy. Both points of view are important to the larger conversation about how politicians should be held accountable and how the media should affect public opinion. Since the most recent conversation about Vice President Kamala Harris, there have been more conversations about how good a leader she is. Some media experts have called this candidate the winner, but people who haven't chosen yet are still not sure. According to the New York Times, voters liked Harris's broad plan to solve the country's most important problems, but they wanted more specific information. They basically wanted to know the details of her plans. This feeling shows a stronger need for political talks to be more open and in-depth. Drawing attention to a disconnect between idealistic goals and the real-world solutions that people want. Voters' reactions to Kamala's criticisms show that there is a persistent conflict in American politics where words often carry more weight than actions. People are strongly in favor of calling for more diversity and inclusion in the media and for politicians to come up with real answers, highlighting the value of accountability and transparency in leadership as society develops. What do you think about all of these? Will it really make a difference, or will it be forgotten? What might happen in the next few months? Harris was hoping that Trump would surprise everyone with a good performance in October. However, the legal situation seems to be turning in Trump's favor, and many Democrats, especially those from the Obama administration, are warning people to be careful. Some political experts like Nate Silver think that Trump might win if the election were held today, which is something they are currently accepting. Silver's predictions say that Trump has a 62% chance of winning the whole election, which means that he could win all the important states by small gaps of 1 to 4 points. There is a lot of worry in the Democratic Party about this negative view, especially since the Clintons are said to be preparing for what might happen. Through his comments, Greg Gutfeld adds a satirical tone to the political scene. Gutfeld is a co-host on The Five and the host of his own late-night show. He is good at mixing fun and criticism, and he often points out how silly political arguments are. He recently made fun of President Biden's public appearances by making jokes about getting a spray tan, and compared Biden's speech to a funny situation involving a tanning bed or a way for him to entertain people and bring attention to the problems the current government is having. This method is entertaining and also draws attention to how Biden's and Harris's public images are being looked at more and more. The analysis done after the most recent debate shows that it wasn't as clearly in Harris's favor as some people thought. Reuters talked to people who weren't sure what they were going to do and found that many of them were still confused after the debate. 6 out of 10 people polled said they liked Trump or weren't sure, while only 3 said they liked Harris after the debate. This shows that Harris may not have been able to connect with key swing voters even though she tried. Even people who work for Biden are getting more and more worried about Harris's ability to handle stress. Reports say that they think her public statements are contradictory and that they are worried that her cautious approach might stop her from successfully addressing the important issues that voters face. This fear is part of a larger stress among Democrats about how Harris's campaign could affect the next elections. As Election Day gets closer, how people think about stories in the media and how politicians talk about their ideas will have a big impact on the setting for voting. Trump's legal challenges aren't having as much of an effect as Democrats thought they would, so they need to change their approach to get the attention of voters who aren't sure which candidate to support yet. If you like this video, please click the next button and share it with your friends.